Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tzipi Oppenheimer, and I am Senior Advisor in the Nefesh B'Nefesh Post-Aliyah Government Advocacy Department. I'm joined this evening by my colleague Roni, who is going to be helping us also behind the scenes, and Yair Givati, who I'm going to introduce in a minute. The session this evening is about renting in Israel, and I'm sure it's going to be a very practical and helpful session. This is being recorded. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording, as well with some of the important links and information that are being shared in the chat. What I'm going to suggest is if you have questions, write them down. I would hold off on, putting them in the chat because they might be answered as the presentation continues, and at the end we will open it up. We will open the session up to questions and answers. We do these sessions, these open forums once a month on different topics. If some of you have joined us for previous sessions, if for some reason you're not receiving an email about the sessions and you heard it another way, you're always welcome to be in touch with us at answers@nbn.org.il. As I said, I'm a senior advisor in our Post-Aliyah and Government Advocacy Department. You can reach us at that same email address, answers@nbn.org.il, which Roni's going to put in the chat, as well as call us, star 3680, Sunday through Thursday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We are here for your post-Aliyah needs, and we're your Nefesh B'Nefesh contacts post-Aliyah. So I am now really excited and happy to introduce Yair Givati. Yair is an Israeli real estate expert. He is part of the Chaim Givati and Co. law offices. Yair was born and raised in Israel, but he spent time in the U.S. and the U.K., both to further his education, which of course helped him give him an understanding of the Anglo mentality. Yair studied law at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. As a native Israeli, he understands how to navigate Israeli bureaucracy, but from his background is also able to provide personalized and efficient service to his English-speaking clients. We have had the pleasure of of receiving Yair's expertise through various sessions over the years, both on renting in Israel, such as we're doing tonight, but also on purchasing property in Israel, which Yair also can help guide Olim through. His contact information will be in the chat as well as in the follow-up email. And I'm going to, with no further ado, welcome you, Yair, and thank you so much for your time and for your expertise that you're going to share with us tonight.
Thank you, JP and Ronnie, for having me. You took part of my first couple of slides, but that's absolutely fine. And as you said, there will be a slide in the end with questions. So if we can leave the question to the end, I'll be happy to stay as long as you need to answer any questions you have. All right. All right. So we're very, very happy to have you here with us tonight, and very happy you actually moved to Israel. I know it's not easy to leave the comforts of your own home, and things can be challenging here. There's lots of bureaucracies, things work differently, etc. And that's why we're here tonight, so we can empower you and give you the knowledge and tools you need in order to navigate the rental system. A little bit more about myself, more than Tzipi just said. So my name is Yair Givati, and I'm the managing partner of Chaim Givati and Co., a firm that was established by my father in 1969. Unfortunately, my father passed away just a little over a year ago, but I'm continuing his legacy of real estate law in Israel. I'm actually, like Tzipi said, I'm actually a ninth generation Israeli, and my father didn't really speak English. But it was important for my parents that my brother and I learn the language, so we moved to England as kids for a year when I was 10. And ever since I joined the firm over 15 years ago, I've focused on serving foreigners and Anglos who are looking to buy or rent in Israel. I understand that buying or renting a property in a country where the laws and bureaucracy are different can be very daunting. And so my role is to really guide you through every step of the journey and ensure you feel confident with the process and what you're going through. Now, one thing I would like to mention before we start, there's a lot of information out there. There are forums and Google and friends, rumors, Facebook. It's really great that you're trying to do your research and find information. But at the end of the day, you don't know if the information is really correct or up to date. At the end of the day, people put things up on the internet and never take them down or never update them. So this is why we highly recommend taking a professional to stand in your corner, guide and secure you in the process. I'm part of a Facebook group that a lot of the questions we get there are due to are regarding rental agreements that people didn't take a lawyer or didn't take a professional to help them with it. Now, why are we speaking about this topic today at this point? Well, the summer is approaching and many leases are renewed around this time. And this is when many people start to think about the upcoming lease for the year. In my office alone, most of the staff are actually Olim, and I've heard about many horror stories of their landlords and rental situation. Even, as of last week, one of the guys on my team was literally bringing his staff to the office so he can have a hot shower because his landlord had not fixed the heating system in his apartment. So knowing your rights and ensuring the right information is included in the contract is really, really crucial. That's why we created also a rental guide, which you can download with the link that was posted in the chat. It includes a lot of information and tips to help you through the process of renting and knowing your rights. Now, what are we going to cover tonight? And yeah, no, I'm not going to take the next 3 hours. It's going to be a much shorter presentation with a lot of time for questions. So we're going to touch the understanding the lease, the important clauses, the important information that has to be included in there, maintenance responsibilities, extra costs that are addition to the rental, and tips for success. Now, as I write here, it really starts with the contract. Now, a written contract is not a must when it comes to renting an apartment, but it's something we highly recommend because, 2, 3, 6 months, or a year into the rental, suddenly, there's a disagreement and you don't have everybody has their own opinion about what was agreed upon. And that's why we highly recommend having a written contract, which includes all the information and responsibilities. Now, although English is not an official language in Israel, and as you'll see, Emir Hashem, when you end up buying a property, the contract will be in Hebrew. But when it comes to rental agreement, if both the tenant and the landlord are happy with English, and this happens quite often, we actually do the rental agreement in English. Now, one of the most important things to have, and this is right at the beginning of the contract, is the property description and proof of ownership. We want to make sure that you're not taking advantage of, or there's no scammers. And there are people like that would maybe rent an apartment and try to sublease it to you to make money on it, or that who can sign on behalf of the landlord. Many apartments around the country are actually owned by foreigners, and they have apartment managers or agents that take care of it. And they many times tell us, "Hey, yeah, I'll sign on behalf of the landlord." But if he signs on behalf of the landlord and he does not have a power of attorney, it's not binding. And the landlord can say, I never signed it. So, part of what we do when we negotiate a contract on behalf of a tenant is to really check, that the ownership is registered properly, that the landlord is the owner of the apartment, and that the agent or manager has a power of attorney to sign on his behalf. Now, it's very important to also make sure that the rent and what payments and the payment terms are defined very, very clearly. Again, as long as as detailed as you can have it, it really makes sure there's no open or loopholes or anything that come up in the future. And if it's clearly defined, really things work very, very smoothly. Now, with regards to the lease period, it's unlike in the US and some other countries as well, where people can actually rent for a long period of time, in Israel, the majority of the rentals will be for 1 year, maybe 2 years, maybe 1 year, and an option for additional year or two. But this is really as long as you get in Israel. There are no long-term rentals. Actually, the law even defines that if it's a rental for over 5 years, the rental has to actually be registered in the land registry. And this is something that is not really done. And the landlords also, most of the time, don't want to be bound by it and only take for a short period of time, a year, 2 years, 3 years, to make sure that either they can get out or raise the rent. Now, you have to know, and of course you'll know it, whether you're renting the apartment empty or furnished. But if the apartment is furnished, it's very, very important to clearly detail what furnishing come with the apartment. Add it as an appendix, and make sure there's a very detailed list. So at the end of the lease, the landlord can come back and say, oh, there's something here and you got rid of it. Or, what the state that the furnishings are in. because you know you don't want at the end of the day to a landlord to come say, "Oh, I gave you a working oven and now it's broken," when it wasn't working most of the time. So you know, as detailed as you can, it's a way to secure yourself. Now, one of the most important parts of the agreement are the securities and guarantees, which are going to touch on in the next slide. Now, there was a major change in the rental law in 2017. I'm saying there was a major because it was quite a change from what was before that, but I don't think it really went all the way. But they definitely added some laws and clauses there to make sure that tenants are more secure. For example, with the guarantees. Until that point, the landlord could basically ask for whatever guarantees he wants with no limits. In the new law, what they did was limit the guarantees that cost the tenant money. So guarantees such as a bank check, a bank guarantee, cash, things that actually cost the tenant money cannot be more in the value of more than 3 months rent. Now, if I would say that the usually 3 months rent, from my experience, and what's more common, 3 months rent is usually on the high end. 1 month rent is on the low end, and what's typically done is that the landlord would ask for 2 months rent. Now, on other guarantees which don't cost the tenant any money, there are no limits. So if they ask you to just give a regular check with an amount, or having a guarantor sign a letter of guarantee, these are not limited in an amount and can be whatever the landlord decide. That being said, you can still negotiate it. You can still say, like, I'm not willing to sign a guarantee for 200,000 shekels. And I'm not giving this number just as a random example. I actually had a client that the landlord asked for a guarantor, or a letter of guarantee for 200,000 shekels, which is really absurd and really out of the ordinary. So we definitely negotiated down. Now, it's very important to include in the agreement also clear terms for the use of the guarantee. For example, you want to make sure that before the landlord uses any of the guarantee, he has to give you a certain warning period. You know, give you 7 days or 14 days to say, okay, if you're not fixing what you need to fix, if you're not making a payment that you're supposed to make, then I will use the guarantee. You want to make sure that the landlord can't just say, okay, you know, you missed a payment by one day, and now I'm going to use the guarantee. So it's very important to have make sure that it's clearly defined. Um, Also, with regards to the end of the lease, which I'm going to touch upon a little later, but it's very important to also define how long after you leave the apartment the landlord must give you the guarantees back. Because again, sadly, we hear stories of landlords that avoid giving it back, and the tenant really have to chase them and sometimes get a lawyer to write, you know, a threatening letter, etc. So it's very important to try and have it defined as much as possible. Now, one of the big questions that always come up are who's responsible for maintenance of the apartment? This is also another great change that they made in the law in 2017. Until then, most of the time, the landlords really threw everything at the tenant. They said, you know, anything breaks, you know, it's the responsibility of the tenant to fix. In the updated law, they limited a regular, normal wear and tear of the apartment must be paid for by the landlord. He cannot ask you to pay for it. The only caveat to that is that the law states that for minor repairs, he can request the tenant to pay for. Now, the law doesn't really define what is a minor repair. And many, I think, landlords or lawyers don't necessarily even know or notice this. And they just say that any repair, any normal wear and tear, the landlord would take care of. But there are some landlords that do that, and then we negotiate what are minor repairs. So it's not a clause that always appears, but if it is appears, it's something that you need to try and negotiate. Usually it would be in the realm of 150, 250 shekels up to 500 shekels, meaning if there's something that you need to fix, which comes up to that amount, that the tenant could be requested to pay it. And again, the amount is negotiable. If there's any damage arising from misuse or mishandling of the apartment, that's something that the tenant would have to pay for, and the landlord can request and use the guarantees for that. Also, another thing that it always comes as a question is like, how long does a tenant have to fix things? So the law states that if it's a regular, normal wear and tear of the apartment, the landlord has up to 30 days to fix it. And of course, there are some charigim, things that are not always like, if you have to fix a leak and it's the middle of the winter, then that's something that could have to wait until a warmer period. But most of the time, repairs have to be done within a period of 30 days. Uh, the ex, uh, uh, um, e- the caveat to that is items that are more important, such as water issues, sewage, electricity. Any issues with the water system, the sewage, electricity has to be fixed as soon as possible. And the law states it has to be fixed up to 3 days from the time it's requested. Most landlords that I've seen really do take care of it in as soon as possible because nobody wants to leave with water leakage or sewage. But the law actually states they can do it up to 3 days from the time they get the notice. Now, what are additional costs? Which again is something very different to how it is in the US. As an example, in the US, most of the time when you pay rent, it includes everything. In Israel, it's the rent amount is net goes to the tenant, to the landlord, and the additional costs are as we see here in the table. Regular use for the apartment, such as water, electricity, gas, the arnona, which is a municipal tax, or the vad bait, which is the building maintenance, are usually being paid for by the tenant. Again, this is not something that is according to the law, but what's according to standard practice. But there are sometimes special circumstances that the landlord might include all of this in the rent. But again, this is mostly uncommon, and most of the time the tenants would have to pay for it. When it comes to maintenance of the building, which is not for the regular maintenance, but for upgrades or special maintenance, such as renewing things in the building, this is something that the landlord cannot request you to pay for, and he must pay for it. Now, the next two lines are actually also were changed in the law in 2017. Until then, a landlord had a lawyer draft a contract and would actually ask the tenant to pay the legal fees because they didn't want to pay for it. In the new law, they said that the lawyer's fees for representing the landlord must pay, cannot hand it over to the tenant to pay for. The Something that they tried to do it in the law, but it was not done successfully. The wording were not done in a proper and careful enough way is regarding the agent fee. What they tried to do was if the landlord has an agent, that the fee to the agent would be paid for by the landlord, and they cannot request the tenant to pay for it. Sadly, they did not word it properly. And there is no requirement by an agent to show an apartment if you don't sign the agent agreement and agree to pay them the agent fee. So this, sadly, what the reality is that many times both the landlord and the tenant would end up paying to the agent, and it was not as the law intended for the landlord to pay the agent. But maybe and hopefully they'll make this change. But at the moment, this is how it is. When it comes to insurance, which was also the recent change, in the past, like I said, and as you can see, it's a reoccurring theme. The landlord tried to throw as much as he can on the tenant. In the new updated law, the law states that content insurance and third-party liability insurance are items that the landlord can require the tenant to pay for. And the reason behind it is that this is mostly for something that is happening within the apartment while using the apartment. But a structural insurance is something that the landlord cannot require. Now, of course, we always try to make sure, including the contract, that the landlord will get structural insurance. But the way the law is worded, that it doesn't have to, but he cannot ask you as a tenant to pay for it. Now, very commonly, the landlord would add a clause in there when it comes to the insurance that they will be listed in the insurance, in the content and third-party liability insurance. They will be listed as one of under your policy, and add a request of waiver of subordination. The this is a word that not many people do know, but the idea is that um, if you are using your insurance, the insurance is not going to come back and try to claim the amount from the landlord. And this is why they're asked to be under the insured under the insurance and have this clause included in the rental agreement. Now, something that many times does at the end of the lease, that's a lot of time where it becomes like some tension between the landlords and the tenant. It's very common to have a clause in the contract stating that the tenant has to clean the apartment properly before leaving, repaint, and many times the landlords would even state what type of paint has to be used. You just have to make sure that you also receive the apartment at the beginning of the lease in the same state. And of course, you have to fix any damage before moving out. But again, if you go back, he cannot ask you to pay for damages that are caused by normal wear and tear, but something that you have to cover according to the law in the contract. I would always set a time with the landlord to a time and a date where the landlord would come in after you vacated the property to go over, inspect the apartment, and also transfer all the utilities back between your name to the name of the landlord or whichever tenant takes over. You want to make sure you do it that time because we have seen so many times where they have not taken care of it, and then the tenant continue paying, for these bills, for utility bills, when they're not living there and trying to get the money back. So it's having that meeting at the end of the lease and making sure that at that point, you pay any debt and you transfer the bills to the landlord or the new tenant is very, very crucial. Because you don't want to start chasing them afterwards for payments or money back. It's also something that you want to make sure. One of the requirements usually at the end of the lease is that you show in one of the conditions in order to get the guarantees back is to show that you don't have any more debt for any utilities or damages to the apartment. So once you do the inspection, once you make sure that all the bills are paid and you hand it over, then you know that you can request already from that point to get the guarantees that you gave the landlord back right away without additional time or having to chase them. One thing that is, again, is very common, even if you wanted to make changes, and usually the clause would state that if you want to make changes to the apartment during the lease period, that is going to be on your expense, and you have to get written permission from the landlord. But even if you get the written permission from the landlord, the almost every time, I can't even remember last time I did not see this clause in the agreement. It's that he can require that you change the apartment back to the state that it was prior or at the beginning of the lease, and take away all the changes that you've made to the apartment, even if he agrees to it. So just keep it in mind if you are looking to make changes or things like that, that you might be required to put it back and spend more money on putting the apartment back to the way it was. Now, this is a very delicate clause because one of the things we see is there's arguments about being able to cancel the agreement or having the option period. Now, according to the law, you don't have to have a cancellation clause with the agreement, meaning it could be a lease that you have to keep the lease for the entire period of the rental and without any way out. But the law does state that if there is a cancellation clause, the landlord has to give the tenant 90 days notice before asking him to vacate the apartment. And if the tenant wants to leave, he has to give 60 days notice to the tenant. Now, this is one of the clauses that the lawmakers actually did right. And in the past, a lot of landlords said, okay, if I want to cancel, I can cancel at any given moment, but the tenant cannot. What they did in the law now is to state that the clause, let's say if they just a clause that the landlord can cancel the agreement, it's null and void unless the tenant also have the right to do it. So make sure that if you do want a clause, know that these are the minimum dates as described by law. Now, when it comes to renewal or what we call an option period, you have to make sure that it's properly worded and written very, very clearly, because Many times we see in the contract an option period which says, yeah, the tenant has the right to has the option to renew the agreement for additional, year or 2 years, but the amount would be agreed by both parties at the end of the lease. Now, this is not a real option because in Israel, unlike the US or some of the states in the US, there's no limit of how much the landlord can raise, the rent by. At the end of the lease, the rent, the landlord could raise by double, triple, or even more the rent. And if this is always a way out, if it's not clearly defined how much would the rent be for the renewal period, then if the landlord doesn't want to give you the option to have the option to renew the agreement, he will just triple the amount, and you're not going to stay in the apartment. So if you want to make sure that you have an option to renew, you have to make sure that it's clearly defined. How much would the rent would go by? What are the guarantees? When do you have to give notice by? The law, as you can see in the last point, states that the tenant has to give a decision, make a decision whether they want to use the option period no later than 60 days before the end of the contract. So if 45 days before the end, suddenly tell the landlord, okay, I forgot, I want to renew the contract, the landlord has a way to get out of it. But as long as if you have the option clearly defined and you give notice no later than 60 days, then the landlord has to give you the option period. Now, some tips for success. First of all, lose your expectations. Don't compare whatever about rentals from the countries you come from. Like in New York State, for example, I know there's a cap of how much you can raise the rent by the end of every year. It doesn't exist in Israel. Understand the process and the paperwork. Understand what you have to sign, how to transfer the bills, the utilities. What do you need to sign? How can I see that the landlord is really the owner? Know what resources are available: agents, lawyers, guides like we have in the chat, which you can download. And most importantly, build yourself a team. There's something new that starts coming into the market. There's the companies that come and survey the entire apartment, take videos and pictures. So at the end of the lease, there's not going to be any arguments about what was the state of the apartment when you started the lease. So, build yourself the team that will guarantee and make sure it's a successful rent. It's an enjoyable without any fights or argument with the landlord. Now I'll open, these are my contact details. They're also in the chat. And like I said, we build a really thorough guide when it comes to renting in Israel with a lot of information and a lot of tips and things to look out for. I really encourage you to download it and go through it. These are also my contact details if you have any questions. And now I'm going to be open to any questions that people have.
Okay, you're welcome to write the questions in the chat or raise your hand and we can unmute you for the questions. If that's okay, Yair, I'm going to unmute.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
Robert. Okay.
Thank you for the presentation.
My pleasure.
Any reduction in the Arnona tax for Oleo Chadash?
Yes. Again, this is because the arnona most of the time is being paid by the tenant and not by the landlord. It's something that you would have to do in person. I mean, you don't ask your landlord to do it. The reduction in arnona is for 1 year, a deduction of 90% of the arnona for apartments that are up to 100 square meters. If, for example, you're renting an apartment is going to be 140 square meters, so the deduction you get, or the reduction you get on the 100 meters, and on the 40 meters, you'll have to pay the full arnona.
You unfortunately you froze when you gave the percentages.
I apologize. So let's say in an apartment of 140 square meters, the discount that you get on the arnona is 90% on the 100 square meters, but for the 40 meters, you pay full arnona. Now,
the question was 90% you get on the
Yes.
first 100 meters.
Yes.
Yair, can I just jump in 1 second?
Yeah, of course.
It has changed a teeny bit. The numbers you said are correct, except for the 90%, meaning there are many municipalities that give a 90% discount, but it's not automatically 90%. For example, Tel Aviv gives 50%. There are even some places that don't give anything. So we like to say that it is usually 90%, but it might not always be. And if you have a specific question about where you live, you should check with the municipality or contact us at Answers, and we can help you figure out how to find that out. Just one more word if I can.
Of
It's
course.
it's a good chance to for those of you who are new Olim, many of the municipalities have what's called a municipality coordinator, and they work for the municipality, and they're really good contact people if you're having issues trying to get the Arnona discount and not being able to do it. You're always welcome to contact us, answers at mbn.org.il. We'll put the phone number in again and the email. You gave a great explanation, but the 90% is not always 90%.
And it's
In
only for the
Jerusalem, I know
first
it's
year.
90%.
That is
So
correct. That is correct.
Only the first year. Okay, thank you.
No, it can,
yeah, it's
excuse
for
me.
1 year.
It's for a
Yeah.
12-year discount. It's a 12-year discount, 12-month discount that can be taken advantage of anytime in the first 2 years. So if sometimes I tell Olim, if you're renting something really small for the first year and you know you're going to upgrade, a 60 square meter apartment, and you know you're going to get a larger apartment for your second year, you might want to wait and use that discount in your second year. But if you, as my colleague Miriam says, if you snooze or you lose, you don't get it retroactive actively. So as long as you start that discount anytime before the 13th month, you'll get a full 12-month discount. You also do need to show a long-term contract when you go to the Arnona office or do it online to get that discount.
I mean,
Long-term.
in general,
Here.
I would say in general, the municipalities will only transfer the Arnona to your name if you have a lease for a year or over. If you're renting for a period of less, let's say, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, most of the municipalities will not transfer the bill to your name. It would have to stay in the name of the landlord.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, I'm going to read questions that were put in, they were written in the chat. If my rental is being sold, how does that affect my apartment?
Okay. So there are two sides to that question. First of all, if there is a clause that the landlord can cancel the agreement, so of course this is something that they can do before selling it. But the law states that in general, if there is no such clause that which allowed you to cancel it, that the rights of the tenant keep with the new landlord, meaning the new landlord cannot kick you out because he bought the apartment, and they actually have to keep to the same rental agreement that was signed with a previous landlord, with a previous owner. So they made sure that the tenant's rights are secured for the entire agreement. So again, if let's say you have a contract for 3 years, and after the first year the owner sells it, the new owner will have to keep the same contract, same terms for the next 2 years, even though he's a new owner. I see the next one is, what is the cost for having a lawyer look over the rental contract? Usually it would be in the realm of half a month to 1 month rent plus VAT. That's mostly the common price in the market.
Thank you. I received a question directly to me, which I'll read to you. If both sides agreed terms to renew a rental contract and trust each other, but despite prodding, the landlord has not provided a contract to sign, what are the risks? What should one do?
This is like one of the things that I said at the beginning of the presentation is that there is not a legal requirement for a written contract. In Israel, the only requirement for a written contract is when you buy or sell a property. But because of that, because of what you just stating, this is why we highly recommend having things in writing. Because memory 6 months later of a conversation you had with the landlord, it could be each side remembers something else, and this is why we highly recommend. Of course, if you have any emails, WhatsApp, text, these are things that can show to the mindset, but I would not skip having a good rental agreement in place.
Thank you. I'm renting for 17 months and the owner didn't want to add a clause for extension because first he wanted to see how we got along. I was always concerned about this because this doesn't protect me at all. I'm on month 3 only. Is there a way you think I should approach this and a timing when it's appropriate to do so, or did I shoot myself in the foot?
Again, a landlord doesn't have to give an option period or extension period. But if there is a good relationship, I would recommend trying to speak to the landlord and say, it's been a few months in. Would you reconsider adding such a clause to give me an option to stay longer for my peace of mind because I want to stay for a long term. But again, the landlord doesn't have to do it. There's not a requirement by law to give an extension or an option period. It's really whatever is negotiable between the parties. There's a question by Eric. It says, in real estate agent fee, that tenant pays always 1 month rent, or is it something that is negotiable? Is it always the case that the tenant must pay this fee, or does sometimes the landlord pay it? Sadly, agents are very strong in that. If you don't agree to sign their fee, they would not show you the apartment. And most of the time, they would charge 1 month rent. Of course, it's negotiable. You can try and negotiate, but at the end of the day, it's the right of the agent to decide how much he wants to charge. I would say that, can you make the landlord pay? If it's a decent landlord, he might pay for it, but again, it's not a requirement. And many times agents would actually charge the same fee from both parties. They would charge 1 month from both the landlord and the tenant.
Can I just add there from my personal experience recently?
Absolutely.
Every single real estate agent, when I turned to apartments that were being shown by real estate agents, wanted the fee 1 month from the tenant and 1 month for the landlord. Every single one.
Yeah,
Do you want me to read another question, or you want to? Do you see
sure.
them yourself? Okay.
I said,
Le
yeah.
Ori asked, landlord is getting electric, cable, management fees, and billing me as allowed under lease. The landlord wants me to reimburse as soon as they are billed. I say I should pay monthly with the rent. Lease is unclear. What is Israel custom?
Again, most of the times, I would say landlords actually want you to transfer the bills to your name. And the main reason for that is that if you don't end up paying, they will not absorb the debt, and it wouldn't be their debt. And let's say you move to another apartment, there's a new tenant, the debt would go along with you, if you have a long-term rental, meaning a year or over. So most of the times, the landlord would actually want you to transfer the bills to your name. If he doesn't want it, you can always ask him, instead of the landlord paying for it, you can ask him, I want to transfer the bill to my name so I can pay it on a regular basis. But again, the law doesn't state who has to pay for it. This is something that is negotiable between the parties. The landlord can require it to be included in the rent, or in addition to the rent that you paid directly to him. There's no specific clause in the law defining it. It's really about negotiating and setting the terms before you sign the lease.
Okay, thank you. I see another question from Eric. Is Yadstein, which is the yad2.co.il site, is it a good site to look at to find apartments without an agent fee? Is it risky in Israel to rent an apartment, he wrote here, with a real estate agent involved, but maybe he meant without, or I'm going to ask with or without a real estate agent involved.
Okay, I would say that Yad is an interesting site. Some landlords do post on there, but many of the listing on Yad would actually be agents posting to get tenants. And then when you approach them, they will tell you one of two things: either sign, the agreement with me to show you the apartment so you can get his fees. Or many agents use it as a lead generators, and many times we see, you call the agent and say like, oh, it was just rented yesterday, but I have a great apartment to show you. Each time, take it with a grain of salt. When you approach someone, make sure to ask them ahead of time, are you an agent, and what's involved, so there's not going to be any issue afterwards. I think agents have a important role. Despite what I was saying about agent before, there are some very good agents out there, and they can really help make a deal. Meaning they can really help you negotiate with a landlord, come to terms, push in a way from both sides to get more favorable conditions. There are, I would say there's definitely cities, in different cities, things work differently. Most of the time, let's say in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, to find an apartment, you would have to go through an agent. But in Petah Tikva, for example, I'll give you an example of my cousin. He saw an apartment, went to see it, and without any agent, it's always on Yach time. By the time an hour later he got to the apartment, it was already rented out. So it really depends on what city you're looking at. But if there's a good agent involved, it can be very, very helpful.
Can I add something, Yair,
Absolutely.
from my
Absolutely.
experience? So
I'm a
sometimes
guest
the
in your show, not the other way
Okay,
around.
thank you. I just had this is a recent experience. I've been living in Israel forever, but I just rented for the first time recently. And I see all these pictures, and then when you go to see the place, they don't look like anything like the pictures. So you can also ask, I don't know if they're going to give you a true answer, but you can also ask if the pictures are recent. Are they current pictures from now, or are they pictures that somebody took 20 years ago and the apartment has, especially when it's a furnished apartment, I'm going to add there. And you want to know because you want to see recent pictures, obviously, because I did not, that might not be legal, but that is what I saw often.
Yeah. We have another question. If nothing written in the contract, but the landlord has said via email that the tenant must leave the flat in the same condition, can they insist that the flat is painted or take money from the guarantee to pay for it? No, unless it's stated in the agreement or in the email ahead of time that you have to paint it. There's not a legal requirement that you have to paint it. It's only if it's in the contract itself. Wendy is asking, if nothing signed in the contract says anything about the garden, is the landlord or tenant responsible to pay for the garden when the tenant rents the ground floor of the landlord house? So I'll start by answering that part. First of all, you have to make sure that the garden really belongs to the apartment. Sometimes there's something called in use, meaning it's something that is belong to the entire building, but because it's outside the ground floor, that you have the right in a way to use it. Um, um, the Again, I think this is kind of interesting question because in general, if the contract said you have to maintain the apartment in the same condition and the garden comes with it, you have to maintain it as well and not just let it die. I have most recently seen that the landlords with a garden apartment actually put in a specific clause about the garden maintenance, sometimes even how many times a month the gardener must come, and regarding maintenance of tree or expensive trees, things like that. So this is something that I've seen that landlords are much more careful recently. And the second part was if the tenant is responsible, is the responsibility only for the part of the garden that the goes through the foot outside of the back and the front door. So again, the tenant would be responsible to whatever part of the garden belongs to the apartment, not for things that are around that would be for other neighbors or things like that. We have a question from Susan. That's for the Arnona discount. Is it within the first 2 years of making Aliyah or within the first 2 years of rental? Again, something's covered here.
It's the first
The
2 years
first,
of making Aliyah.
yeah. So as Tipi said before, you can use it only throughout the first 2 years of making Aliyah, not the first 2 years of rental. By the way, it's not just for rental. Even if you buy an apartment, you are still eligible for that discount. So it's whichever apartment you use, you can do it. And sometimes I've seen, if there's three roommates and one of them is Ola, they actually do the rental all in the name of the Ole or Ola to get the full discount. Because if it's three people, let's say as an example, it doesn't have to be three people. If let's say there's three people on the agreement, only one of them is Ole, the discount will be on the portion for the Ole, and the other two will not get that discount. So again, many times what we've seen is to get the discount, only the Ole would be on the lease. But again, you have to take into consideration that if you do that, all the responsibility also falls on whoever is on the contract. Any other question?
There's one more, Sammy. My brother's in the army. When he gets out in rents, will he still gets his benefits? There's his account with him starting in the army. I'm going to answer that one if that's okay at you.
Absolutely.
The Arnona benefit is a benefit that does not freeze when you're in the army. but there might be benefits for released soldiers that will also perhaps give him some type of discount. There are other types of Arnona discounts. They're all means tested, meaning it depends on your income, but you're welcome somebody who thinks they might be eligible, including somebody asked about senior discount. It's always means tested. Either you're receiving some type of social welfare stipend from Bituach Leumi, and that also gives you the right for that, which would be some type, or you have a certain low income for seniors, but also there might be other discounts. You're welcome to contact us. I'm going to just give a plug for the Jerusalem municipality has a great website in English in general, and it talks about all the various types of Arnona discounts. They're going to be the same available discounts just about in all cities. So you could look at it there, see if you're, fit one of those categories, and then contact your own municipality about that. But you're always welcome to reach us at answers@mbn.org.il. Call us Sunday through Thursday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., star 3680, and we'll help you through that. Are there,
Um,
is,
Sibi, I just posted in the chat again, the link to download the guide and my contact information if anybody has any questions. CP and Ronnie, thank you very much for having me again. I always enjoy coming and trying to help as much as I can.
Thank you so very much, Yair. An email will be sent out to anybody who is participating in the webinar in this session, as well as anybody registered. It will include the same links that Yair has included about the rental handbook and a link to the recording and his contact information. Give us a couple of days to get that out to you. Thank you so very much, Yair. Thank you, everyone who
Absolutely my
joined
pleasure.
us, and we hope to see you at other events that we have. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you, Robert.